Okay, so are you ready to like really dive deep into this? We're talking GST on used cars in India
I'm ready. Should be interesting, yeah.
and specifically the margin scheme, right? Well, it's confusing.
Definitely confusing, yeah.
But don't worry, because
Yeah.
that's exactly what this deep dive is all about.
Right.
We're going to try to make sense of this whole margin scheme thing using a source document we have called Pasted Text.
Okay.
It's going to be our roadmap, so to speak, because it outlines the scheme according to the CGST rules 2017, specifically Rule 32.5.
Yeah.
Right?
That's good.
All right, so let's start with the basics. Let's imagine a super simple scenario. Two people, just regular people, right?
Yeah.
They're not registered for GST, nothing like that.
Mm.
What happens GST-wise when they buy and sell a used car?
Well, let's say you're selling your car to, I don't know, your neighbor, right?
Yeah,
Down the street.
yeah.
And neither of you are registered for GST. In that case, you actually don't have to worry about GST at all. At least not for sales within the same state, that is.
Okay, so keeping it simple. But I'm guessing, like, the moment we cross state lines, things get a little more complicated.
You got it. The thing is, if the sale is part of, like a business,
Hmm.
then the seller, they might have to register under GST and charge 18% on the sale.
Wow, okay.
But if you're, like just selling your personal car, you don't have to worry about GST, even if the buyer is in another state.
Makes sense, yeah. So our source, this pasted text, it gives this very specific example, and I think it's a really common one. Like, what if you or I, an average person, we're not registered for GST,
Uh-huh.
and we decide to sell our car to, let's say, Spinney, a big registered dealer. What happens then?
So in Pasted Text, they use this example of a guy named Mukesh.
Okay.
He's unregistered, and he sells his car to Spinney, which, as you said, is a registered dealer. And here's the interesting part. Mukesh doesn't actually have to charge GST,
Oh, if
even though Spinney is registered. And this is true for both sales within the state and even if he were selling to, a dealer in a different state.
so why is that?
Well, it's because of a special notification, number 10/2017, that basically says these types of transactions, they're exempt from GST.
Okay.
And something called the reverse charge mechanism that would normally shift the GST liability to the buyer. It doesn't apply in this case.
Gotcha. So that's really good news for like anyone who wants to sell their car to a dealer.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. Now, let's get to the heart of this deep dive, the real reason we're here.
Yeah.
The margin scheme.
Yeah.
Can you tell us like what it is and why it's so important for used car sales?
So the margin scheme, it's basically a special way of calculating GST when, a registered dealer, like Spinney from our example, sells a used car.
Okay.
And it can actually be a good deal for both the dealer and the buyer, especially if the buyer's not registered for GST.
I see. So how does it actually work, like in a real sale?
All right, so let's go back to Spinney, right?
Yeah.
They've got Mukesh's old car, and they want to sell it, this time to Dinesh, and Dinesh is also unregistered.
Okay, got it.
So Spinney has a couple of options here. They can use this margin scheme, which means they pay 18% GST, but only on the profit they make, the margin.
Oh, interesting.
Or they could choose to pay 18% GST on the entire selling price of the car, which would be a lot more.
Right. Makes sense.
But hold on, it gets even more interesting if they're selling to another dealer, say Cars 24.
Ooh. Oh,
If neither of these dealers has claimed something called input tax credit, basically, it's a way to reduce your GST liability, by claiming credit for the tax you've already paid on inputs. So if they haven't claimed that, then they can both use the margin scheme.
Oh, so it's kind of a two-way street there.
Yeah, exactly. But if Spinney chooses not to use the margin scheme, then Cars 24 can't use it either.
So it's like a strategic decision then. It's not automatic.
Absolutely.
What are the things that would make like a dealer choose to use it or not use it?
Yeah, so you're right, it's a choice. And it comes down to, well, a few things, like how much they paid for the car in the first place, their profit margin, and whether or not the buyer's registered for GST.
Makes sense, yeah.
I mean, think about it. If the dealers snag the car for a steal, right, and they think they can make a good profit, using the margin scheme can really slash their GST bill. And if the buyer's not registered for GST, well, using the margin scheme can actually make the car cheaper, which could lead to, a faster sale.
So that's all about finding the right balance, it sounds like.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, so for our listener who maybe they're, I don't know, thinking of buying a used car, selling a used car, what's like the main takeaway from all of this?
I'd say the biggest takeaway is this. This margin scheme, it can be a real win-win for both the buyer and the seller, especially in the used car market. If you understand how it works, you could potentially negotiate a better price and, you know, save yourself some money on taxes.
Totally, yeah. And I think it's worth remembering, even though we've, tried to lay it all out here, GST
Yeah,
it's complicated. It's really complicated.
definitely.
And it's always a good idea to talk to a tax professional
Yeah,
to get advice that's really specific to your situation.
yeah.
That don't take our word for it.
Right, for sure. And this whole discussion, it makes me wonder, like, if the government wanted to really boost the used car market, what kind of changes could they make to the margin scheme to make that happen?
Ooh, yeah, that's a really interesting question. What do you think? What could they do?
Well, that's something for our listeners to ponder.
Exactly. And on that note, we're going to leave you all with that thought. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of used car GST. We hope it's been helpful. And as always, happy driving.
Happy driving.